If you ever walk down Via Martelli in Florence, right next to the Duomo, you've passed by this wonderful place and you probably didn't even notice it. It's a quiet door and a small sign. And then there is a red number. It's 35 slash R. And I'm going to talk about this R, what it means in Florence. Um, Basically, Florence has two kinds of numbers. So if you have like the house number, there's two kinds. One is um, living houses, so people that the houses that people live in, and the other one is commercial activities. And commercial activities have their own numbers, and they're called R because of rosso, red. And basically, it means there is some kind of business there. So behind this number, there is one of the most fascinating little bookstores. It's called Libreria Giorni. Libreria means bookstore, and Giorni just means it's the last name of the family that owned the bookstore. And it's not one of those polished modern bookstores with a cafe inside. No, this is like a really old. It's a vaulted. They call it semi-interrato, which is a basement kind of establishment. In fact, you have to go down some steps that I'm painting right now, and there is nothing on the first floor. It's just you go downstairs, and there's like a basement with vaults, and there is books everywhere. It's quite quaint, and when you walk in, the smell is just wonderful because it's kind of musty, and I like that. And it's there's lots of prints, books, music also. There's some vinyl for sale, and so before you even start flipping through those books, you just feel like you entered some kind of hidden room in Florence, which is exactly what happened. And the visitors accept a small shop, but instead, this one is kind of a big store downstairs, and the space is deeper than it looks. It's almost like a tunnel built inside an old convent. And that's exactly what it is, because the store is part of a former convent that today houses a high school. It's the Liceo Classico Galileo, and it's interesting to note that this is a high school for people that want to go in either way into humanities or law degrees or social science. Basically, you study the Greeks, the Latins, you study a lot of history, and the high school is upstairs, and this is their basement, basically. The shop has been opened in 1937 and has always been run by the same family, the Giorni family, and they have it on their sign. I think the sign is probably from the 60s still, but they never change it. It's actually a glass, and the name of the bookstore is carved into the glass. So it's quite something, and it never broke. And it really literally saw the history of Florence just unfolding in front of its eyes. There was World War II that came and went. There's the flood of the 1966, and I don't think they were affected because they're quite far away from the river, but I'm not sure. And then, of course, the rise of the big bookstores. I remember that there was a huge bookstore just across the street for many, many years. Um, I think it was called. It wasn't Feltrinelli because that was somewhere else. Marzocco. It was called Marzocco, and it was right across the street. And it was one of these big bookstores with cafes and everything. And then, of course, Amazon came along, and so that put a big dent in all the bookstores. And like many other stores that disappeared from this street, this store is still there. So I'm really happy about that. And they have this little case outside, and you can see the books they feature there. It's very interesting to see it because there is books about everything. And during the fascist period, You could find books there. They were not approved by the regime, they were banned, but they kept them there, going against all the laws and all the principles. Who in their right mind will push forbidden books during such a repressive time? But they did. This is part of their history, and it's well documented too. Today, they sell lots of different kind of genres: art, philosophy, literature, theater, you name it. They have it probably. They also sell movie posters, but these are the real ones, the ones that they were basically painted by hand and then hung to advertise movies, old Italian movies. And then they have a whole section of books that are out of print, and obviously because they're antique books about pretty much everything, mostly history, and these are books that you cannot find on Amazon. Um, and they have a huge music section, which has surprisingly, this shop is specialized in classical music and opera, and they sell books about music theory, composer biographies. This is a huge section there, and then even like musical scores, so you can find stuff to play there. And this is not very random because this shop was known among famous musicians like Claudio Abbado or Riccardo Muti, and used to visit this very same store just to find special music to play or to listen to. And they also have an entire section of Don Giovanni, which is one of my favorite operas by Mozart. And um, this is basically what they sell, Libreria Giorni, and everybody knows this bookstore in Florence. And then in the 1950s, the Giorgi family expanded, and they started selling a little bit of prints and etchings. Now, prints and etchings used to be a really big thing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And some people still buy them and they're still being made, but they are not that popular today because we have very cheap ways of printing things. And so prints are not that valuable anymore. But in the Libreria Giorni, you can find, I even painted it here. If you look in the window underneath Occasioni, now you see those paintings. They look like paintings. They're not books. Books are on the bottom, and those paintings are actually very important and huge prints. But they are not prints like from a press. They're prints from a plate, and they're etchings. And you can find old maps or reprints of Renaissance engravings, and then architectural drawings. This is one of my favorite section. And then vintage cinema posters. Those are also prints. And then etching and aquaforte. And then some art reproductions, but that's a minor collection. And who for anybody who loves printing or sketching, this is a definitely a dream place to go and have a little look at all these prints. And it's a nice bridge between the literature, art, and a visual memory of Florence, because a lot of these prints are actually about Florence. So you can see how Florence was in the 1800s, or even before that, where we still didn't have photography, but we did have good etchings. So you can still see how Florence was in the past. And Libreria Giorni, it fits perfectly into the Florence landscape because it has a long story of books and manuscripts, and it preserves the memory of Florence. And if you ever read The Bookseller of Florence by Ross King, it's a very popular book here. You know that Florence in the 1400s was the center of book copying and selling and publishing. There were very few places actually in Europe that used to do this in the 1400s, of course. And it's right around the time when the printing press was invented. And as a matter of fact, printing press came from Germany, And two monks brought the printing press down to Rome first, to Subiaco to be precise, which is a little town in the mountains of Rome. And they started printing the first books. And then slowly the printing press came to Florence. And we are talking late 1400s. So these were the first books printed in the world, I would say. And Libreria Giorni continues this tradition by having these books. And let's do a little comparison with the Feltrinelli and Libraccio. So Feltrinelli is the biggest bookseller, probably the biggest in Italy, but they have several stores in Florence. And Libraccio is actually very recent. And if I'm not mistaken, Libraccio is the new bookstore by Marzocco. Because Marzocco, I don't think it exists anymore, but it was very big in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And then they disappeared for some reason. But now there's this new bookstore. It's called Libraccio, which means the bad book. And so Feltrinelli um, has two big places where you can go. And one is in Piazza della Repubblica. That's their biggest store. It's like on 3 stories. There used to be cafe inside. They took it out now for some reason. And it's beautiful. It's very modern. And there's lots of new books. Great for browsing. You can just go there, and you can sit down and you can browse books. And it's great because there is an English section too. Most of the books are in Italian, of course, but there's an English section, and there's the latest novels. And one of the novels is The Bookseller of Florence by Ross King. I have not read it, but I heard that it's very good. And then the other store is in Via dei Cerretani. This one is huge too, and it has a lot of used books, school books, and discontinued items. And there's a mix of everything, basically. It's a lot messier and louder. There's lots of more people, but that's what's expected. But none of these bookstores, these two are the biggest ones in Florence, but none of these bookstores are like the Libreria Giorni, which is smaller. And Feltrinelli is modern. Libraccio is very practical. But Libreria Giorni has been there forever, and it's run by one family. So it's small, very intimate, hidden, and historical, and deeply connected to the intellectual life of Florence. So if you happen to be somewhere in Florence, you can look up bookstores. And here I'm just putting some shadows over these prints. They're really quite something. And next to this Libreria, next to Libreria Giorni, there's also a book cart. So basically, it's like a food cart, but they sell books outside, and you can spend hours there. They usually have a section that is like €2 or €1 per book, and those are used books. Sometimes from the past, they're very old books, but they're really good literature. And one of the authors that I'd like to read is Pierpaolo Pasolini, which is a Florentine author. He's very famous. He was killed eventually in a very bizarre accident, and it hasn't been still solved. Nobody knows who killed him exactly, but he was very controversial. Here I'm applying these shadows because it's a very sunny day. So the shadows this is the little nook that's outside, and it's hanging on the wall with the books, and it's casting this really long shadow. So to go back to Pierpaolo Pasolini, Pasolini was a very prolific Florentine writer. My favorite book is called Story of Two Lovers or the story of two poor lovers, something like that. Um, and it's the story of um, basically how Florence people were in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it talks about the ordinary lives of people. If you ever happen to come across that book, I highly recommend it because it gives you an idea of who the people of Florence really are, and it's a beautiful book because there is actually a couple of streets that you can find still today, and it's about these streets where people used to live, and they used to do different things. Everything is described in minimum details, like in the 40s and 30s, 1930s, who was doing what kind of job, what it entailed, and why. It's not very. It's not a documentary. It's more about like a novel about these lives, but really it feels like a documentary because you're able to make yourself a pretty good mental image of what these places were and what these people were doing and how the whole Florentine society used to work in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, which is quite a thing because there's not many. There's a little bit of photography from that period of time, but not a lot, to be honest. Here I'm doing some shadows again, and I would say the painting is done, but um, I kind of want to put some darker on the bottom. I kind of want to darken it up a little bit because walls are never clean on the bottom. Imagine when it rains, like if you paint a wall white and it's outside, if it starts raining, it's going to get all dirty on the bottom. So I want to make that bottom a little bit dirtier. Um, I'm applying some more shadows here. Okay. Another big section that they have is the art section, which I love to browse because there is huge books about Florence in black and white, and these are so they're books from like the 50s or 60s where color photography wasn't still a thing, and so everything is black and white. And the beauty of it is that if you have black and white photography of art, then you can definitely tell the values of the colors because black and white photography will let you see what kind of value a color has, and then you can compare it with the color photography of the same piece of art, and now you can see what the value is. And this is very important to just figure out how value of colors work. Here I'm applying this gray on the bottom, like I said, to make it a little bit darker, so it's not sticking out too much, which is what I didn't want. And actually, I think I could have gone a little bit more um, on that wall. I think it could have been dirtier. And I'm making this shadow a little bit darker. This was quite difficult because these shadows are really hard to guess properly. But they're pretty dark. If the sun is in the sky and it's like summer, the photo I'm painting from was taken in summer. Um, so there's definitely a dark shadow there. So I think the painting could be done here. Um, I think it's a wonderful place. You should definitely visit. And next time you walk down Via Martelli, which is a huge street, and it's right behind the Duomo. You should look up the number 35R, not just 35, 35R, which they literally call the 35 Rosso, so red. Um, you can't miss it. It's on the wall. I think there is like newsstand in front of it. I'm not sure, but um, and behind the doors of this piece of Florence, and it survived everything, centuries and centuries of um, difficulties. And the bookstore has protected banned ideas and welcomed great musicians, sold rare books, and preserved the old tradition of prints and etchings, which I love to collect. And in the city so famous for its monuments, this little piece, this little place remains exactly like it was 50 years ago, almost 100 years ago now. And it just lives in that little basement, the curved ceilings and the dusty shelves. I never met the owners, but I'm sure they're lovely people. And the pages just keep opening, and people just keep going to the Libreria Giorni. It's not just a shop. It's actually a tiny universe where you can go and you can spend your afternoon just flipping through the pages. That's quite something. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.